Good morning. It's Wednesday, June 5th. The multi-front war in the Middle East is now 243 days old. I'm Jonathan Schanzer, Senior Vice President for Research at Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Welcome back yet again to the FDD Morning Brief. I understand we've got a good number of new folks tuning in here to the FDD Morning Brief. So let me first say hello. We're glad you've found us. And just so you know what you're getting into here, day and night, our team scans the news in English, Hebrew, and Arabic. Then we package it up and dish out our best stuff live 3 times a week, every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 8:30 a.m. Eastern. The structure is always the same. After I review the headlines, we introduce you to some very smart people from across the political and ideological spectrum. Then I tell you what FDD is working on in case you're looking for some other things to read or watch. You get all of that in about 20 minutes, give or take, and all for the price of, well, nothing. That's better than a sharp stick in the eye, I think. So if you have not yet subscribed, please do so on YouTube or Apple or wherever you get your podcasts. All right, our guest this morning is Shabbos Kestenbaum. He's a master's student at Harvard University, and he's been in the news quite a bit lately, but maybe not for the reasons he once dreamed of. He's suing his school. We'll find out why, and we'll talk about what's happening on campus in just a few minutes right here on the FDD Morning Brief. Yesterday, I got beat up a bit on social media. Why? Because I doubted the ability of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to lead. Before I explain, let me acknowledge a few things. I know Israeli politics are limiting Bibi's room to maneuver. There is no question the White House is actively undermining Netanyahu. And yes, Biden could care less how the war ends so long as it ends before the Democratic Convention in August. But Bibi has been sitting on the 5-yard line in Rafah since March. Hamas looked like it was on the ropes, and now Gaza is a stalemate. America has restricted Israel, but Israel hasn't changed the equation. Then there's the ceasefire debacle. After Biden announced the deal, which would admittedly leave Hamas intact if implemented, the Israeli government went into a bizarre spin cycle, total chaos. And are they against it? Are they for it? I mean, I'm still not sure. This week, there are massive fires now in northern Israel. They are the result of Hezbollah attacks. This was entirely foreseeable, yet Bibi doesn't seem to have a response. But what worries me? I'm not convinced Bibi has a victory strategy. So look, I admire Netanyahu. He's brilliant. He's done a lot of good for Israel, and I want him to succeed. But assessing the war right now, I don't like what I see. Leaders need to lead, and if they can't, they need to get out of the way. So I'm not saying that Bibi must step down today, but Israel's margin for error is razor thin. His government's dysfunction simply cannot continue. Now for your headlines. Headline 1, let's take a closer look at the violence in the north. Hezbollah in Lebanon has set northern Israel ablaze. At least 15 active fires were reported. Sirens blared in the northern cities of Akko and Nahariya. Temperatures on the ground in places like Kiryat Shmona reached a scorching 109 degrees Fahrenheit. 6 reservists and 5 civilians wound up at the hospital. The main highway up north shut down as 30 firefighting squads worked overnight Monday into Tuesday to put out the fires, but not before thousands of acres of land were impacted by the flames. This pretty much clinches it. War looks like it's coming to the north. Israeli TV is now filled with frustrated analysts wondering when the government is going to step in. Hezbollah drone and missile attacks doubled in the month of May. We're talking about 95 anti-tank missiles compared to 50 in April. This is obviously unsustainable. Headline 2, the Iran-backed Houthis in Yemen are training to invade Israel. They've been drilling for months. In fact, Israeli media aired footage showing armed men storming a mock Israeli community. Apparently, the Houthis are eyeing the southern city of Dimona, which perhaps not coincidentally is home to Israel's nuclear facility. The footage includes an undated recording of Houthi chief Abdul Malik al-Houthi boasting that nearly 300,000 members of his death cult have participated in over 700 different exercises. Don't dismiss this, folks. A local who reportedly defected from the Houthis, said that the Iran-backed group is actually serious about invading. Admittedly, Yemen is more than 1,200 miles from Israel. This explains why al-Houthi reportedly asked Saudi Arabia and Jordan to allow hundreds of thousands of men to transit their territory in order to wage war on Israel. Lovely, isn't it? And headline 3, a new public health study found that enough food is entering Gaza to feed the enclave's entire population. Here's the scoop. Between January and May of this year, food deliveries by land and air were enough to feed Gaza's 2 million plus residents. No less than 3,300 calories per person per day were supplied. This not only met, but it exceeded international standards. Meanwhile, the UN is still falsely alleging that Israeli policies are causing a famine. So is the International Court of Justice, the ICJ, which accused Israel of deliberately starving civilians in Gaza. Look, I am obviously not saying that Gaza should be the destination for your next Club Med vacation, but 3,300 calories per day doesn't sound like deliberate starvation to me. The problem is aid distribution. Once the food enters Gaza, it often is hijacked by Hamas, and Hamas has a well-documented problem of looting, hoarding, and stealing food from their people. Maybe the UN should be condemning that. Okay, I'm now excited to introduce you to Shabbos Kestenbaum. He's a divinity student at Harvard, but his experience there has hardly been divine. We'll hear about his trials and challenges now here on the FDD Morning Brief. Welcome, Shabbos Kestenbaum.
Thank you so much. Great to be here.
All right, well, let's start with your story. What's your background and what led you to go pursue a master's degree at Harvard?
Sure. So I'm a first-generation American. I'm a religious Jew as well. So I'm one of 7, which is pretty typical for my community. And although I had gone through the yeshiva process and went to an all-male school and lived in Jerusalem actually for a number of years, it dawned on me that I wanted to study religion really from an academic perspective, from a pluralistic and secular environment. And there's no better place to do that at Harvard, and in particular Harvard Divinity School. So although I was working in informal Jewish education, I decided to apply. Lo and behold, I got in, and I was very proud and very excited that as a Jew and as an American, I would be able to contribute within this academic environment and also gain from my professors, from my classmates, and from fellow students. But lo and behold, as we'll discuss in a minute, that was very much not the case, and quite quickly I had to realize that.
All right. Well, so now tell us a little bit about your experiences on campus. How bad was it?
Yeah, I don't think the American people really appreciate, not just at Harvard, but academia more broadly speaking, has really been infected by this poison. So I'll give you a quick example. Harvard University, now rather infamously, was ranked by the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expressions dead last as it pertained to free speech. This is an institution that regularly prohibits, rescinds, and regulates students, guest lecturers, speakers, and it made it very bizarre, to put it mildly, that when the Harvard Palestine Solidarity Committee, this is about 2 years before October 7th, but when they invited Mohammed al-Kurt, someone who professes that Jews eat organs of Palestinians, that the Israeli occupying forces have internalized the ways of Nazi Germany, lamented on Twitter just 2 or 3 months ago that Palestinians can't hijack planes anymore. It made it all the more bizarre that when Jewish students, myself included, went to the administration and said, well, if you routinely regulate free speech, then why wouldn't you apply that as it pertains to a vile anti-Semite? And the answer we got, well, their First Amendment rights. We're a university that's committed to the free exchange of ideas. And again, that would be one thing if that was actually true, if that was actually the case, like the University of Chicago, for example. But Harvard does not have a track record of unlimited free speech. They do not have a track record of the encouragement of intellectual discourse. And when it came to anti-Semitism, there was this very clear and this very blatant double standard. And as I said, this is 2 years before October 7th. On the night of October 7th itself, we had 34 student groups representing more than 1,000 students that were drafting what they called an emergency statement, blaming Jews for the largest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. And then it goes without saying that just a week later, we had a physical assault at the Harvard Business School. We had a Jewish student who was spat on while wearing his yarmulke. I personally had a staff member taunt me with a machete. I had to have private armed security outside my house for about a week. And again, goes without saying that calls for the globalization of the Intifada, Palestine will be Arab from the river to the sea, that was commonplace. That was being chanted by students and professors alike.
Sounds like a nightmare. How did the Harvard administration respond when you spoke up about these problems?
Yeah, it sort of reminds me of that line about the Palestinian people. They never missed an opportunity to miss an opportunity, and that was really Harvard University. So when Claudine Gay was president at Harvard, we took the approach relatively early on to work with her, to work with the administration, to work with the Board of Overseas and the corporation. And every single time we were rebuffed. I think it's now infamously publicly known that Claudine Gay, in preparing for her disastrous congressional testimony, did not consult anyone on the anti-Semitism advisory group. She didn't consult any Jewish student. She didn't consult any Jewish faculty member or professor. So there was never a desire or willingness to listen to what Jewish students were saying. And that's why we, unfortunately, have to resort to media, why we have to resort to the United States Congress, why we have to resort to the court of law, because Harvard is either unable or unwilling to make any type of meaningful change. And I always say that if Harvard wanted to change, if they wanted to enforce policies to combat anti-Semitism, if they wanted to discipline students engaged in anti-Semitism, they would have done it. We are, 7-8 months out? And it's very clear the only way that the institution will ever change is if there's sustained and consistent outside pressure. And that's what we are unfortunately having to do now.
Have you seen any change, by the way, since Claudine Gay left?
Not only haven't I seen any change, I would actually argue it got worse. So, of course, we had the encampments, I like to call them the Harvard Hamas homeless shelters, where we had for about a month students and professors sleeping in these tents, professing at all hours of the day that Palestine will be Arab, drawing our Jewish university president as the devil with horns and a tail, making sure that Jewish students, myself included, were being monitored by these self-appointed safety marshals and these safety vests who were following us everywhere we went. There were signs saying that before you enter the encampment, speak to, a liaison. So they really took over the yard. They really took over the campus. And they were able to do this uninterrupted, unabated for close to a month. And in fact, part of the negotiations, number one, the fact that there were negotiations is a story unto itself, but part of the negotiations for them to leave was that they will be able to have a seat at the table with the Harvard Corporation. So they will be able to discuss divesting from the Zionist entity. They will be able to discuss with the Harvard Corporation a Palestinian Studies Center. Almost all of them will get off scot-free with no disciplinary actions. And again, this all happened post Claudine Gay. This is supposed to be a new era of Harvard. And we've just seen anti-Semitism so normalized and so celebrated. I'll just give you one last example. We had faculty and staff for Justice in Palestine post a horrifically anti-Semitic cartoon that was actually originally published in apartheid South Africa, claiming that Jews, not Zionists, but Jews, control the world. And it was the depiction was a Jew choking by the neck a black man and an Arab man. And again, no condemnation, no real accountability, no discipline. And it's very clear that Jews are treated categorically differently than any other minority group on campus.
Really, really disappointing. All right, well, tell us about this lawsuit. I've seen that complaint is filed. I've seen other complaints also. And I'm just wondering, I guess, how this is different from the one filed at Columbia or the one at MIT or the one at Haverford. Is there something unique about this one, or is it pretty much in line with what we've seen across the country?
Yeah. So yes and no. First of all, I would say that it is a damning indictment on higher education that in order to receive equity, equality, justice, we have to resort to this. I'm represented by Kasowitz Benson Torres, which is an aggressive litigation firm in New York. And I told them months ago before we filed, I said, look, if Harvard were to change course, if they were to enforce policies, discipline students, then there would be no need for this lawsuit. But of course, Harvard never did that. So in terms of our lawsuit in comparison to Haverford or Columbia or Penn or NYU, I mean, the list really goes on. What makes it unique is, number one, I'm the only named plaintiff. Columbia has more than a dozen. And the reason I'm the only named plaintiff is not because I'm the only student who's been affected by this. On the contrary, this is really a voice for dozens of Jewish students across the university. But at Harvard, there is a culture whereby if someone speaks out against anti-Semitism, they will have real blowback, whether that's socially, whether it's professionally. And there have been dozens of students who've told me directly that we just don't want to put our names out there. So unfortunately, that's really again, a damning indictment of Harvard, and why I had to be, unfortunately, the only one to do it. But our claims are relatively similar to other universities. So gross violations of Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, for example, gross negligence as it pertains to enforcing policy and protecting Jewish students, and of course, a total negation of school code of conduct, the policies and the contract that I sign as a student. My end of the bargain is I give them my tuition dollars, and then I expect an educational experience as well as minimal amount of protection. And we've had diminished educational opportunities and a lack of protection. So you'll see those claims in many of these other lawsuits coming from other colleges.
Yeah. Well, the House of Representatives expanded its probe into campus anti-Semitism. And the list of schools includes Harvard, Columbia, Penn, and Cornell, plus MIT, Barnard, and Northwestern. Topping off the list of 10 are Rutgers, Berkeley, and UCLA. How does this factor into the wider phenomenon here? How do you see the role of Congress impacting your plight as well as that of others?
So the role of Congress in all of this is crucial. And I want to stress that this really is bipartisan. I mean, obviously, House Speaker Mike Johnson has made it the Republican mission to go after these universities through all congressional committees. But ultimately, on these congressional committees, there is a willingness and a desire by most members of both parties to tackle this issue. So I've been able to testify in front of the House Judiciary Committee, the House Education Committee. I know the House Ways and Means Committee will be having a testimony next week, and there's a real desire to get to the root of the issue. And they have been critical in this fight. Why? Because they have subpoena power, because they have the bully pulpit in the sense that Harvard receives roughly $600 to $700 million each year in federal subsidies. They are tax exempt, and there has been a real serious desire, again, Republican and Democrat, to look at the financial status quo of all of these universities. Why is it that they are able and they're comfortable receiving hundreds of millions of dollars of taxpayer money while also receiving hundreds of millions of dollars from anti-democratic, anti-Western, anti-Semitic countries like Qatar, like Russia, like China, like Jordan? So Congress will be critical in this battle. And they've also been able to sustain this outside political pressure that I was mentioning, because as I said, internally, these structures, whether it's Harvard or Penn or Columbia or elsewhere, these structures are not designed to create long-lasting change, especially to Jewish students who are not part of this DEI mandate. And therefore, Congress and the court of law and the media are really critical factors in this fight.
Yeah, and I'll just note we've actually seen the House Oversight Committee get involved looking into AMP and SJP. So we're actually seeing a widening of congressional interest right now, which I think is a good thing. Very briefly, before we let you go, the summer obviously provides an opportunity for college administrators to reflect on their failures from the past year. If you could name one or two steps that you'd like to see them take ahead of the fall semester to ensure that students like yourself feel safer, what would they be?
Well, number one, just because you mentioned it, the Students for Justice in Palestine equivalent and the affiliated clubs at Harvard have promoted terrorism. They have promoted resistance as a labor of love, as legitimate political expressions. They have called for an open intifada against every settler, every Zionist, and every capital of the world. So these are real threats. And the lack of condemnation from Harvard at minimum is concerning, and more practically, the lack of disciplinary actions. As I mentioned in the beginning, Harvard has a track record of disciplining speech, so much so that it was ranked dead last when it came to free speech. So when students are issuing objective calls for violence, that needs to be nipped in the bud immediately. We know that there were students who just attended the People's Conference, I think it was in Dearborn, 2 weeks ago, and they were very adamant that we will take the lessons applied where we learned from convicted terrorists in the People's Front for the Liberation of Palestine. We're going to use those lessons and apply them to Harvard University. That's very scary. So we need immediate repercussions for students who are promoting acts of terrorism. and certainly repercussions for students who are engaged in violence, like the physical incident at Harvard Business School. So we need the enforcement of policies, we need disciplinary actions, and then also we need a very clear moral consciousness that Jewish students not only are protected, but they contribute to the tapestry of Harvard University. I always say that Jews don't need Harvard for the most part. We're pretty innovative, we're pretty resourceful. Harvard needs its Jews. And we were 25% of the Harvard population about 20, 30 years ago, and now we're about 4%. It's not because Jews got dumber over time. It's because there was a sustained effort on Harvard's part to get rid of us. And if that's the route that Harvard and all these other Ivy League universities want to go down, it's their death wish. But Harvard needs to make it clear that Jews are a critical part of the infrastructure and the academic body that comprises Harvard University.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Thank you, Shabbos Kestenbaum, for joining us live today on the FDD Morning Brief.
Thank you so much.
That's deflating, but glad he's in the fight. Here's what FDD has on tap for you today. Number one, my colleagues at FDD Cyber Center have a new report that examines the state of cybersecurity in America's healthcare system. It's not pretty, folks. Cyber criminals that target hospitals are low-life dirtbags. They're targeting healthcare providers and demanding ransom from those caring for the sick. Some threaten to release sensitive patient data unless hospitals pay more. My colleagues recommend that in addition to prosecuting these criminals, the U.S. government needs to do a lot more to help hospitals, particularly rural hospitals, stand up and improve their cybersecurity to prevent the sick stuff from happening in the first place. FDD's Anthony Ruggiero, who served as Senior Director for Counterproliferation and Biodefense at the National Security Council at the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, has a new piece in The Hill castigating the new pandemic treaty currently under consideration. Anthony notes that it fails to hold China to account for concealing the initial coronavirus outbreak and for enabling the worldwide pandemic. Anthony advises that the Biden administration reject this accord and instead demand that any draft treaty put forth by the World Health Organization, the WHO as it's known, must explicitly acknowledge China's misconduct. And finally, my colleague Haitham Hassanein has a new piece imploring Washington to get tough on Cairo. Haitham stresses that Egypt's Gaza policy, which includes blocking the flow of humanitarian aid, denying Palestinians temporary refuge in the Sinai Peninsula, and covertly changing the terms of a hostage deal, make it a malign actor in Israel's ongoing war against Hamas. Why is Washington still treating Cairo like a partner? Nobody knows. Okay, that's a wrap, folks. Read our expert analysis on our website, FDD.org. Read our quick takes on X at FDD and support our work with a tax-deductible donation at FDD.org/invest. Tune in Friday for another riveting episode of the FDD Morning Brief. We're going to bring on Eli Lake, a terrific journalist who writes for the Free Press. He's also a fellow son of Philadelphia, so you know he's going to enlighten and entertain. Hope to see you Friday. Until then, I'm Jonathan Schanzer, signing off for FDD.